Hi, my name is Wincy, and this is my submission for the assignment Promote Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander Cultural Safety. The first question is, Summary of History and Culture of Indigenous Australians Pre-Colonisation. History. Aboriginals descended from the first peoples to leave Africa. They travelled across Asia over many generations. Most researchers believe that Aboriginal people have been in Australia for 40,000 to 70,000 years. This is a timeline of events. 10,000 to 40,000 BC. Aboriginal Australians arrive in Australia. 1770. Captain James Cook claims Australia for Great Britain when he lands in Eastern Australia. 1788. The first European colony is established. It's made up of prisoners from Great Britain. 1804 to 1830. Tasmanian Aboriginal Australians battle British settlers during the Black War. 1850. The Gold Rush brings many prospectors to Australia. Many Aboriginal sacred sites were destroyed. 1876. The Tasmanian Aboriginal Australians officially disappear with the death of the last islander. 1901. Australia becomes a federation. The Constitution states that Aboriginal people will not be counted in the census. 1967. Aboriginal Australians are able to become Australian citizens. Aboriginal Australians receive the right to vote. 1976. A law is passed that declared Aboriginal Australians entitled to their lands. 1992. Australia's highest court rules that Aboriginal Australians are the original owners of the lands. 2008. Australian government made a formal apology to the Australian Aboriginal people. Culture and lifestyle. Aboriginals were what we call nomadic. They moved from one place to another, from season to season. They carried very little with them and would build temporary shelters to live in, with materials found at each campsite. Aboriginal Australians often did not wear clothing in summer, but wore animal skins or fur during colder months. They were not ashamed of their nakedness. They painted their bodies for celebrations and rituals. Aboriginal culture is based around the concept of the dream time, which was when all of the things on the earth were created. Indigenous Australians were very spiritual and believed that there were many good and evil spirits that related to everything that happens on earth. They performed many types of ceremonies and expressed themselves through artwork, such as wood carvings and bark paintings. The designs of the paintings were filled with wavy lines, circles, and small dots, and each pattern told a story. Aboriginal people have a big emphasis on respecting elders, and they would turn to their elders of the community for leadership. Number 2. The impact of European settlement on Indigenous Australians. The belief of European settlers and Aboriginal people were very different. The Europeans did not understand how Aboriginal society worked, and this caused much misunderstanding, confusion, and conflict. The Europeans regarded the Indigenous inhabitants as inferior to themselves, and they tried to change the way the native people lived their lives. Some differences in the way they lived. Aboriginal people had a spiritual connection to the land and sea, and the European settlers had no respect for the Aboriginal rules and spiritual beliefs. The Aboriginal people had many sacred sites, but the European settlers invaded and would overrun Aboriginal lands. The Aboriginal people did not always wear clothes. However, the European people did wear clothes. The Aboriginal people lived a nomadic lifestyle and did not live in towns. The European settlers built towns and villages and had land ownership. The Aboriginal people were hunter-gatherers. Food was collected every day by fishing, gathering, and hunting. The European also hunted, but they also farmed food. The Aboriginal people had a typically healthy diet. When the European people came, they introduced unhealthy food such as refined flour, sugar, and alcohol. Once the Europeans came in, they introduced new diseases to the Aboriginal community, including smallpox, measles, the flu, and the common cold. This caused many deaths and decline in the Aboriginal population. The European people spread new diseases, causing a large number of deaths. The European settlers also introduced new animals such as sheep and cows. These animals dirtied the waterholes and destroyed many of the food sources that Aboriginal Australians needed to survive. The Europeans also enforced their own laws and denied Aboriginals the right to practice some of their own cultural traditions. The Aboriginal people used basic weapons and tools and did not have guns. The European people did have guns. For thousands of years, the Aboriginal people lived life by their own rules. Once the British settlers came in, they were now forced to live under the laws that the newcomers had put in place. The colonial government tried to force European ways on the local people, despite them already having their own traditions and culture. This sometimes caused violent clashes and brought disrepair to the Aboriginal groups. In 1788, the British arrived and it overturned the world of the native people. Due to the unexpected occupation of their land by British settlers, this resulted in more competition for food. They brought along new diseases and killed many of the Aboriginal people. Within 2 years of the British arrival, the Aboriginal population of the Sydney region had halved. Between 1910 to 1970, when removal of Aboriginal children from their families was at its peak, between 10 and 30% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were forcibly removed from their families and their communities. These generations of children removed under these policies became known as the stolen generations. The policies of child removal left a legacy of trauma and loss that continues to affect Indigenous communities, families, and individuals. Number 3. A plan to contribute to bridging the cultural and language gap between Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous community in relation to employment, health, and improved cultural safety. Australia's Aboriginals are the country's most disadvantaged group. In 2011, the Australian Research Council announced funding for 10 Indigenous research teams to help improve the quality of life for the Aboriginal population in Australia. Close the gap. The campaign's goal is to close the health and life expectancy gap between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous Australians. The campaign is built on evidence that shows that significant improvements in the health status of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples can be achieved within short time frames. Family matters. Strong communities, strong culture, stronger children is Australia's national campaign to ensure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people grow up safe and cared for in family, community and culture. Family Matters aims to eliminate the overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care by 2040. Australian Human Rights Commission Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It affirms the minimum standards for survival, dignity, security and well-being of Indigenous peoples worldwide and enshrines Indigenous peoples' right to be different. Housing. In 2008, the Council of Australian Governments agreed to the $5.4 billion National Partnership Agreement on remote Indigenous housing. The main objectives are to reduce significant overcrowding, poor housing conditions and severe housing shortages. Over 11,500 new homes will have been built or refurbished to a livable standard across 300 remote communities at the end of this 10-year investment. The aim of these initiatives is to improve the quality of life for Aboriginal Australians, who are the most disadvantaged population group in the country. Thank you for watching.